Hi, this is Scott Shay, author of InGoodFaith.com and the chairman of Signature Bank. I just had a great talk with Miro. I'm boss to boss. Such a pleasure and a great experience.
So tell me, what is idolatry?
Idolatry is a set of lies about power. It's about ascribing super authority or superpower to finite beings, people, ideologies, natural processes, or in the ancient world, animals. So we may think we licked the god King Pharaoh 3,300 years ago and we're done. But in reality, the whole 20th century was a catalog of god King Pharaohs. So how did Pol Pot and Stalin and Mao and Hitler and the Assad family and the Kim family get away with what they got away with? Well, Stalin was able to kill all the kulaks, murder all the kulaks, starve actually a quarter of the Ukraine, send tens of millions to the gulag, and nobody questioned his super authority and the authority of the Communist Party. That's idolatry. That's exactly what Hitler did. And they used the same, Stalin and the other tyrants used the same tropes as Pharaoh. Pageantry, poetry, myth, theater, all of course backed up with demonstrations of brutal power. And if I could add one more thing, we tend to think of idolatry as just being on the macro level, like Stalin and Hitler. But in reality, we face idolatry even in our day-to-day encounters. How did, let's just as an example, Kevin Spacey, Charlie Rose, Matt Lauer, Harvey Weinstein, sadly I could go on and on. How did they get away with what they got away with? Because they successfully set themselves up as idols. They were unquestioned and unquestionable within their industries. Nobody would question a Charlie Rose. If he did it, that was truth. And sadly, to be an idol, to be a God King, is to be able to murder who you want to murder, steal from who you want to steal, abuse, unfortunately, with these smaller figures, abuse who you want to abuse, and be brutal to who you want to be brutal to. And that's what they got away with. And it's not so easy toppling idols. And frankly, that's something I've thought about through my entire business career, because I've met a lot of people who deify themselves. And I think it's a central problem in business, frankly.
You know, you stole the words out of my mouth. I was going to ask, who are real life examples right now? And you threw it out there. Is there, you think there's any that are currently happening that we don't consider one, but you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, not naming names, but there are absolutely people out there who deify themselves. I think, so can I tell you a story from when I first started my career?
Yeah, let's do it.
I worked at Salomon Brothers.
Mm-hmm. And everybody, this is Scott Shay, by the way. Scott Shay, you can check him out at scottshay.com. So you can put a face to the name if you're just listening to on the podcast. But, without further ado, keep going.
Oh, and it's SHAY, by the way, for your listeners.
SHAY, yes, Scott Shay, SHAY.
They misnamed Shea Stadium, and I complained enough that they finally tore it down.
That's a great way. That's a great way to remember. I mean, you could do that intro everywhere. I'm sure you do.
I've been saying that for a lot of years, even before my book. So when I first started at Salomon Brothers, this is back in the 80s, I used to take the Lexington line. For anybody who knows New York, I used to take this terrible line before they air conditioned it. And one day, as I'm walking on 96th Street, I hear a horn, and I see there's a middle-level bond trader who is driving his Mercedes and offers me a ride downtown. And I think, great, this is my lucky day. And he tells me once I get in the car, any day that he's driving, because he's a pretty fastidious guy, he will be willing to give me a ride. So these are the days that most of your viewers may not even remember, the days before cell phones. So he would talk the whole time. And I learned his philosophy as a bond trader. which is, and as a person, which is the only person who was important was him, and to a lesser degree his family. So if he could rip off a customer or a client, he would. If he could sabotage or do something to somebody above him, that's okay, as long as either he doesn't get caught, or you can't, or he can keeping it a secret, or the person couldn't retaliate, that he totally crushed the other side. And there was no issue with hurting other people. I mean, he was the only important person, but he wanted to keep on a persona. So he would certainly give to the right political and charitable causes. He would nod sagely when people talked about income inequality or any sort of issue like that. But he was a deity in his own mind. Mm-hmm. And I realized the more I was on Wall Street, the more I met, frankly, a lot of people like that who, when nobody was looking, would abuse others when they thought they could get away with it. And it's still a problem with us today. And I think it's gotten better, because just like that bond trader, he didn't want to break any rules, because he certainly didn't want to do anything that would harm him.
Go to jail.
And
right?
Go to jail. He didn't want to be fired. But on the other hand, no doubt about it, he would get away with what he could. So today, I think the rules are tighter. I think there's clearly more adult and appropriate supervision, but there's still a lot of people who idolize themselves and try to get away with what they can get away with.
So what you're saying is the movies we watch, because I mean, I feel like there's a new Wall Street movie coming out every year, and they're great. A lot of, they're awesome. So a lot of them would you say are pretty accurate in terms of the idolization and the power and, taking advantage of the small guy?
Well, I can't say some of them seem over the top, but I will say this. I worked at Salomon Brothers in the age of when Liar's Poker was written. I don't know if you've heard of that book, but it was written by Michael Lewis. And I actually, when the book came out, mm-hmm. I went to the bookstore because I taught one little segment in the training class that Michael Lewis writes about in the book. Luckily, oh, wow. I wasn't mentioned. I didn't do anything wrong, but Liar's Poker, mm-hmm. I think some of the things were exaggerated, no question about it, but it certainly picked up a certain zeitgeist that was endemic to the 80s on Wall Street.
And would you say that nowadays, is there enough regulation? Is there not enough? And I guess that's probably a highly debated topic, right? Day in, day out.
So I'll tell you the truth. I think to a certain degree, and I talked about mm-hmm. this in my TED talk, which is that I think the problem with regulation right now is it's gotten too detailed, and people have lost track of the big picture. So if like that bond trader, he actually didn't mind detailed regulation, because if you could get around it and you followed all the rules, you were good to go. Mm-hmm. So I think people have lost track on the big issues. One thing that I put into place at Signature Bank is that I started to see our standards of conduct, which we make all of our colleagues sign. Every year they have to re-sign the standards of conduct. And there are a lot of good things, but because of regulation, this document kept getting longer and longer. So the thing that I asked to be put in, and it's right up front, mm-hmm. is that that the documents say essentially the essence to standards of conduct is to follow the golden rule, as Hillel formulated it over 2,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. Don't do unto someone else what you wouldn't want done unto you. The rest is commentary.
Yeah.
So don't do anything to a fellow colleague, to a client, to a counterparty, to a vendor, to anybody in the course of your conduct, in the course of your employment at Signature Bank, that you wouldn't say was okay if it was done unto you. And yes, now you have to read the next 35 pages, but the rest is commentary. And I think people have lost track of the golden rule, and I honestly think that's partially a function of idolatry, being, not again in the classic way, but being systemic in our society. Because the Bible, look, I'm a believer. The Bible, the first thing the Bible says is that we're all created with the image of God, as it is in Hebrew, but B'Tselem Elohim. We all have a divine spark. Mm-hmm. And if you believe that, and I believe that you have a divine spark, then that puts a responsibility on me to how I treat you. And if we keep that in mind, that's the essence of the golden rule. Because the opposite of that is, well, you have your God King, I have my God King, and actually all I need to do is crush you and your God King. You don't have a commonality with me.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that. And unfortunately, I think there are too many people who have deified themselves in their groups.
And you think nowadays it's taken it, things are going up to another level because social media, and you got the whole like who has the most followers, who has the most influence, and I mean it's just, you think it's affecting it in a worse way? Maybe like it's only going to get worse before it gets better.
No question. And by the way, this was even anticipated in the Bible, because David's. I don't know if you know the book of Samuel so well, but there's a great story in the book of Samuel. David has a son, Avshalom, and Avshalom decides that he's a little impatient for David to stop being king. So he sets himself up at the gate and he says to everybody who's going in, you're good, you're great. I mean, he tries to be the original influencer. He sets up a ceremony at the beginning of every year because he's such a good-looking guy. He takes his hair and cuts it and weighs it. I mean, he sounded like the original social influencer. And by the way,
good way to do
the
it.
way he dies is he gets caught in his hair in a tree. But that's like sort of the profundity, which
pretty
is
ironic, right?
Yeah, that's so. Social media, people have been trying to do social media for a long time, and again, that's a part of the self-deification. But it's really dangerous because it casts it essentially creates a idolized version of each other. And I'm not a big user. I mean, I'm on social media. I don't want to say I'm not, but I'm not a big user of social media. I think it's got its positives, but you've got to be, on a personal level, you've got to be wary and to not get too caught up. Use it,
exactly,
but use it in a good way.
So use it, instead of using it as this is it, this is life, using it more as complementary, I guess, or kind of being there at all times to help you out, but not make it like life.
Right. And too many people make it life, and I think that's part of the reason why there's a increase. I mean, the statistics are clear. There's an increase in people having depression and other psychological issues, and part of it is because real life is different than social media life, and social media life can distort one's values. This is something a lot of other people have talked about. It's not central to my book, but it's something to be wary about.
So a side topic, I guess, that kind of definitely I'm curious about now is, do you think it's easier for you to turn off when you go, like say you go on a getaway or a quick trip, since you're not as invested into social media, or is it, just the same? Is it just as hard to kind of turn off business?
So I will tell you, I'm an observant Jew. So from sundown on Friday night until dark on Saturday, I don't turn on my phone. I don't watch television. And back in the 80s, this sort of thing didn't make that much of a difference. Yeah. But it is so wonderful to turn off my computer before, sometimes I'm rushing. I know it's sundown. I know it's about candle lighting time. And I've got a lot to do, and I've got to answer some emails. But then once it's off, and I know that I've got a self-imposed time on myself until dark on Saturday. And sometimes on a personal level, sometimes I'm, will rush, afterward. I know I've got things going on and it'll get dark. It's getting late on Saturday night. And I'm like ready to open up. And other times I don't even want to turn my phone back on.
Yeah, right.
Because I've
That's
so
beautiful.
loved not being in touch. And it's just the greatest feeling. So if there's one thing that's helped me, it's that. And the one thing I suggest to people who ask me, about social media and the like, is I say, it doesn't have to be Shabbat. It doesn't have to be the Sabbath. Pick a day and say, I'm just not going to be on any technology for a day a week or a day a month, whatever you can start out with. And you just find it so liberating. I love it.
I love that. So you do like a full 24 hours about, right?
It's about 25 hours, actually.
25.
It's from sundown on Friday to dark on Saturday. And it's
Awesome.
so great.
I like that.
Just experiment with it once and you're going to say, gee, I really like that. And then you start looking outside and talking to your spouse or your fiance or your girlfriend.
The other things to life, right? The other things. Oh, that's nice. I like that. I'm definitely going to look into that. And I'm sure the listeners could check that out as well. But in your book, In Good Faith, that's been out now, and we could pretty much get a copy anywhere, right? Amazon.
Amazon. It's on Audible. It's on Kindle, and it's available at good bookstores everywhere, I'm told. And if it's not held at the bookstore, then it's clearly not a good bookstore. Tell them to order it, and then they'll become a good bookstore.
This is what they tell me, right? I'm just the messenger. But so more In Good Faith. It's kind of, I take it you're taking your experience now because you've been part of Wall Street. You're still there, but at the same time, you're doing other things that not everybody is. You wrote a book, you wrote another book.
Yeah.
You're speaking, you're giving TED Talks. Where did this come? Like, how did you, where did these two sides fit together? Because it seems like you almost did a 180 because you're starting to talk about, questioning religion, faith, atheism. You're throwing in some big taboo topics here.
Yeah. Well, this, first of all, I think people should have sort of multiple careers in their mind, and they don't necessarily need to be sequential. So I'm clearly very active in business. I started out the minute I graduated, working. I've worked ever since. I've done a variety of things, but I think I think it's helpful to folks to have another passion, and it could be volunteering. I think it helps if you have something in your mind where you're trying to make the planet a little better, and it could be doing something to environmentally conscious. It could be in a faith community. It could be not in a faith community. So I've always believed that, and I like to write. I've been a writer. I mean, if people on my site will see, I've written about corporate issues. I've written about corporate tax reform and a whole bunch of things that have nothing to do with, well, maybe they do require some faith, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I really found a lot of people in the business world. So I wrote my first book, which was on the American Jewish community. And then in my business life, people started to come up to me and they said, Scott, you wrote this book about American Jews, but why do you really care? Isn't God just sort of the tooth fairy and Santa Claus and all sorts of other made up stuff? And haven't we outgrown this? And I was surprised at how many people in the business world, because I am out there, I'm chairman of a bank, I meet a lot of people, how many people started broaching this topic to me? And it felt really, at first, a little strange, because it wasn't what I expected people to talk to me about. But I realized that there were people who were saying, I realized there were basically three groups of people, two of whom were asking me questions. One who just didn't believe, thought it was all, religion and God was the tooth fairy. The second who thought, you know what, I believe in God, but I don't understand why. It doesn't seem very rational. I'm going to park my reason at the door because I believe, but I don't get why. And was taught in college not to believe in God and et cetera.
Science,
and then
right?
there's science, yeah, which is a real not correct. And I deal with this in the book. There's nothing in science that disproves God. But, and then there was a third group, and I was part of the third group, that I believe it's rational to believe in God with all we know about science, with all we know about the historicity of the Bible, and with all we know and feel about modern morality. So after a while, these conversations kept percolating with me. And at first, my thought, in all candor, was to commission I was looking for a book that would answer these questions. I couldn't find one.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to diss any books, but they all required sort of that you start out as a believer. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't think that was a good. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll I'll commission a book with some friends. And then once I got into that, I realized that, I think I can write this book myself. And that started me on a 5-year journey. I thought it would be a lot easier than it was. This was 5 years of essentially all my discretionary free time. I gave up bicycling. I used to be an event bicyclist. I used to do stuff that I gave up. I gave up a lot of communal work. But I really thought this was like the most important thing I could do for the world. And so I did it, and it's gotten some resonance out there. It's definitely creating a stir in a conversation, and and people are thinking about it. So I'm continuing to go with it, and I'm doing a lot of interesting things with debating atheists, going to Google. It's been fun. It's been fun as well.
What's been like?
And I'm on Boss to Boss. It doesn't get better than that.
You are on Boss to Boss podcast. Yes. Scott Shay, everybody. SHAY. What is the most question that you get after people reading this book? Is there some part of it, the ones that are questioning faith and atheism and religion? What is the one thing you keep getting asked about, and it's like the most controversy now, and you're so passionate about to answer?
Well, I'll give you the question I get most from non-believers and from folks struggling with their faith. The most common question is, if you believe in a good God, a God that's all good, how can there be so much bad stuff happening in the world? How can people get sick? How can, lots of bad things happen? A hurricane that devastated the Bahamas. Mm-hmm. The more and more that I'm talking to people, and the book tour has been great for that I'm hearing people have problems. I mean, I hear a lot about questions about, well, the Bible isn't moral. That's probably the second biggest question, and I deal with that in section 2. It's a big question, and I think I answer it, and I just answered a lot of that in a debate with Michael Shermer too. But the biggest question is the problem of evil, because in the end, I think most people get that atheists, that's the toughest question from the atheist. For believers, that's really, in a way, the only question we have to answer. Atheists have to answer a lot of other questions, because really it's an intellectually awkward set of precepts in terms of science, in terms of a lot of things. Mm-hmm. But on evil, it's got a good explanation, which is, life is random. It sucks. Get over it. Whereas for believers, it's not so easy. It's really, really hard. And I'll give you just a taste of some answers that I give, because this is really a whole section of the book.
Yeah, because
not simple.
It's not. And, religion, it's something that's brought up a lot, and people don't like talking about it too. I mean, it's a scary thing, right? People don't want to, when you're dealing with business, you just want to think about business.
But. Yeah. So let me give you a personal story. which I think will be a good way of sort of answering this in a way. So I grew up, as you know, we talked in the pre-interview. I grew up in Chicago. My father was a Holocaust survivor. When he was liberated from Dachau by the American forces, he weighed 60 pounds. He had, and his family was wiped out. His father was murdered before he was deported from Svexna, Lithuania. His brothers were murdered. His uncles were murdered. Basically, everybody was murdered. My closest relative on my father's side is a second cousin once removed. That's my closest relative on his side. Everybody else was murdered.
Wow.
So he made it to Chicago because he was fortunate enough to be liberated by the American forces after they knew not to just give food to these survivors, because they would immediately go into insulin shock or they couldn't digest anymore. So my father was nursed back to health for a year by the American forces, and then he went to Feldefang, to a displaced persons camp, and ultimately someone in Chicago who had never met signed for him and said he won't be a burden on the American taxpayer. I'm something called the Bailey program. And he got to Chicago and he remarried and he had a son, me, and it was very, I didn't, and this may actually be the beginning of the book. I don't know, but he was certain there was a God. There was no doubt in my father's mind that God existed, because there were so many miracles that happened, literally, in his view, miracles, where if just something had happened so slightly different, he would have been dead. He would have been killed, or he wouldn't have made it. If he would have been liberated a week later, he would have been dead by then. Dachau had been liberated a week later. He was on the verge of death. So he knew that a whole bunch of miracles had gotten him to Chicago. But he was angry at God, because how did God let his father, his brothers, his uncles, just about everybody he knew? I think he only had one friend who survived from Svexna, who made it to America. How did God let that happen? And so, to a certain degree, that question has been, a central question I've been thinking about my whole life. And I talk about it a lot in the book, because I do think it comes from, and I think my father's conclusion was that people have free will, and that people can be pretty evil, but if every time someone did something wrong, a lightning bolt came down and struck us, that there would be no free will, there would be no morality, because whether you're a believer or non-believer, if you know you're going to get struck by a lightning bolt because you don't help a little old lady across the street, you're going to help that little old lady across the street, whether you're good or evil. And it's also incumbent on the rest of us, if we see evil, to act. There were people who could have stopped, who could have done things to not allow the Holocaust. For example, in 1930, as late as Kristallnacht, the Germans were willing to let all the Jews go if anybody would have taken them. And famously, the Canadian Prime Minister of his age said, no Jews is too many. And so many people closed their borders. And we know the story of the USS, we know the story of the St. Louis. We know the story of boats that were turned back. So partially, God is merciful when we're merciful. God, I believe, gives us a tailwind when we do the right thing. But if we do the wrong thing, ultimately, I think he steps in. The Almighty, well, doesn't have a gender, but the Almighty steps in. But not so for the Jews in the Holocaust. 6 million, a third of us were murdered. But in the end, there was a savior in the name of the American forces and the Russian forces and the English forces. But, and the idea of Judaism and the Jewish people survived, but not without huge cost. Had people acted correctly, had Germans acted correctly, for sure, but even those around the other folks in the world acted correctly and righteously, nobody would have been murdered. I mean, there still might have been a war, but there wouldn't have been an extermination campaign. And so I think it's incumbent upon us, and to a certain degree, it raises the moral stakes because, I think God believes in us. The question is whether we believe in ourselves to do the right thing. And it gets back again to idolatry, because how did Hitler get away with this? He got away with telling people to murder Jews because they weren't human. He called them vermin. I mean, if you weren't part of the Nazi ideology, that's clearly an idolatrous ideology, that you didn't count for anything. I mean, if you were not a Nazi, if you were not a good German, if you weren't of Aryan stock, you were not really human. It was okay if you would be exterminated. And that's why idolatry is so dangerous at a macro level. I think I think you asked the central. I think I think those folks who are asking me that question are asking really the central question. And I try to give them an answer. It's a longer answer in the book.
Yeah.
And I talk about natural disasters and other sorts of things, but that's the primary question that people wonder about. Yeah,
because I mean, I'm sure others answer it differently, and I'm sure that you elaborate a lot more in the book. That's definitely a way to look at it. I mean, that's for sure. I guess, and then kind of going back, this is where you got to from where you're at now. I mean, it's crazy how your experiences. You started up a huge bank that's now a $50+ billion bank, right?
Just about 50 billion.
Just about 50 billion. And then here you are, like full circle, you kind of giving back. You looked for something. So you almost started up a business within a business, right? You started up a business and then you started up another one while running a business, essentially. Mm-hmm. And what do you think, how do you feel about that part of it, the entrepreneurism? Is that something that drives you? Is it for everybody?
Look, I love being an entrepreneur. I started up before this. I started up a private equity shop with my partner, Lou Ranieri. So entrepreneurship runs in my blood, but it's not for everybody. I mean, there's also risk. I mean, look, the bank might not have made it. There were lots of banks that started the same year as us that are no longer there. So you have to have the stomach for risk, and it's not for everybody. And I tell people that first of all, it's got to be at the right time in your life. At certain points in your life, it's appropriate to take risks. You're ready for risks. Other times in your life, you might not be. And you've got to go into a new business or into being an entrepreneur, understanding that you're going to go into a continuing emergency. That when we started up, you can't see my whole office, but there were about 5 people in a room, really the size of my office. And we started up from scratch. It wasn't a garage. It was nicer than a garage, I have to say, but it was air conditioned, but it was not big. Mm-hmm. And, you were glad everybody was wearing deodorant because it wasn't that big. And we took that risk, but it was a process of starting the bank, which other than Shabbat, which is why I'm so grateful for taking 26 hours off of the world to recharge. Other than that, it was full time. I mean, it was every time. It was a continuing emergency. So you got to be prepared for that. And that's not for everybody. And look, there were days it wasn't for me, but I got through that too.
Yeah. And you said 5 employees, and now how many are there?
We are about 4. I think just about 1,400 as we speak.
Wow. Yeah. And that was since 2001, right? When you started?
Yep. We opened our doors May 1st, 2001.
All right, coming up on that 20-year anniversary, right? Before we know it.
Well, yeah. It's pretty remarkable. Hard to believe.
It is. Well, now we're on to our listeners' favorite segment of the show.
Welcome to the round with no name, because they're all taken.
All right. So the rules are simple. Very simple. Yep. We don't want you thinking too much, but thinking just enough. We just want you to spit out the first thing that you think of. We want to see the real Scott,
okay,
behind it all.
This is the psychoanalytic portion of the show.
Yes. This is where we get you. And actually, to top it, put the cherry on top. My producer, Steve Wiley, he's always lurking. He always manages to find his way into my studio at my house when I record these podcasts, and he gives me a very hard time if you go over the 5-second rule. I have to deal with him, not you. I have to deal with him. So let's hope I don't have to see Steve. It's not fun. All right. What is your favorite book?
Mine, in good faith. No,
Besides
but in
from you.
reality, besides that, in all candor, the Bible. No question, the Bible.
What is your favorite movie?
Oh, I would have to say The Castle, which was an Australian movie, hard to find. One of the best. Every single line is funny. I've never seen a movie where I laughed at every single line. It's great.
Got to check that out.
Yeah,
right.
It's great.
If you're about to be stranded on an island tonight, and you could only bring one item with you. It can't be a person. What is it?
A good knife.
That's one way. That's one way to do it. Who has been or is your greatest mentor?
Lou Ranieri. Lou Ranieri, who founded the mortgage market, has been my business mentor. He's great. I in touch with him still today.
How do you feel about entrepreneurism? Is it a fad?
No. Entrepreneurs have been around since Joseph in the Bible.
If you had an unlimited amount of money right now and you could start up any business not your own, what would it be?
Oh, I'd start up a business that was part of figuring out how to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. It's going to be
that's a first.
Unlimited demand for that.
That's a two boss exclusive here, everybody. That's a first. What is your favorite Wall Street movie?
You have to be The Big Short.
Big Short. That's a classic. I mean, it's technically not a classic, but it's great. It's a good movie. How do you drink your coffee?
I don't drink coffee. I don't drink any caffeine, actually. It's not a religious thing. I just don't.
Tea?
I drink tea, but generally decaffeinated.
Is there more to it? Like you just never wanted to get addicted to caffeine? Do you have?
I used to be somewhat addicted years and years ago during the 80s. I used to really like almost medicate myself with caffeine during the day, and I went cold turkey, and I don't think I've had caffeine knowingly since in 25 years.
What did it change? Like maybe less anxiety or just dependence?
I just noticed that it made me a little jittery and maybe too quick to answer. And I like to think a little bit. And so I just gave it up one day cold turkey, and I haven't been back. I'm not against caffeine. There's no theology against it. But for me, it didn't work well. So I didn't even have Coke. I don't even have Coca-Cola with caffeine. I don't have soft drinks. I don't have anything with caffeine.
So what is the one item then you consume every single day that's not caffeine that you can't go a day without?
Well, I essentially drink two beverages, water, in a multi-use bottle, and wine. I'm a big wine. I love wine, and I collect wine. I like red and white, and I like to try to pair it. And I am into wine.
And last but not least, if I came into your office right now and wanted to have a serious business meeting about how I can help you raise even more money and more capital, and I walked in with socks and sandals, how would you feel about it?
So 10 days about you, no problems. I just got back from a trip to San Francisco on business. We opened up an office in San Francisco, and I walked into so many offices where the CEO was wearing essentially sandals. I don't know about sandals, but jeans everywhere. And I didn't wear a tie to any meeting. For the whole week I was there, I think I was the best dressed person in every meeting I was in.
Wow, that says a lot. Well, I'll take that. That'll be noted. If I make it out to your office one day,
Please do.
Serious proposal about something. I don't know what yet,
Okay.
but we'll think about it. That's how I will come, and we'll see if that stands. But you survived. I survived. Steve Wiley. Well, more like I survived. Steve Wiley did not come out. I didn't have to deal with my producer at all. So we're good. We're good. We'll let hopefully we got your blood flowing a little bit after all that. And Scott Shay, everybody, scottshay.com, SHAY. Be sure to check him out. His book In Good Faith. But yeah, it's solely just been a pleasure to have you on. Definitely looking forward to seeing what's next, seeing what else you write about. And
thank you.
The mic is yours if you want to have any final closing thoughts.
No, I thank you. Thank you. I really enjoyed this interview. It is a pleasure to be with you. And I'm doing events around the country from time to time on the book, and they can all be found at scottshay.com. I just did an event in LA. I'm doing something coming up shortly in Connecticut. So I'm really, and people can actually send me emails via the website because there is a contact form.
Yes, and it's on scottshay.com. You scroll all the way to the bottom right, and it says contact me, and you could reach out to you with any questions and any burning desires. Definitely. Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All good things to you.
That is all for this episode of Boss to Boss. Your next step is to visit bosstoboss.com, where you will find proven techniques followed by professionals to help you make that next step. Again, that is boss2boss.com. And remember, the time is now.